Hi everybody, it's Terry. Welcome back to my workshop. The new model that I want to talk about today is the CJ-6 from FMS. This is a scale model of the Nanchang CJ-6, which has been the primary trainer for the Chinese Air Force since the late 1950s. It is still in service today, not only with the Chinese Air Force, but also with many of our allies. Not only that, but you can also find the CJ-6 in the collections of many private warbird owners in the West. Now, is the CJ-6 a pretty airplane? I don't think so, but it is a very interesting one. What I find particularly noteworthy is that many of the systems which would be hydraulically or electrically driven on a Western design airplane are pneumatic on the CJ-6. So things like the retractable landing gear, the wheel brakes, the flaps, even the engine starter are all driven by compressed air. There are two tanks on the airplane which hold the pressurized air, and there is also a compressor which is driven by the engine to keep those tanks topped off. The end result is an airplane that's relatively simple, reliable, and easy to maintain. And I think that's one of the primary reasons that this airplane has stayed in service for so long. And that is also one of the big appeals of this airplane for private owners. FMS's model of the CJ-6 has a molded foam airframe, which is mostly pre-built, and it also comes pre-painted in this trim scheme. Most of the CJ-6s that serve in the Chinese Air Force are an overall dark green color, but this red, white, and blue scheme from one of their demonstration teams I think is a bit more interesting, and it also provides good in-flight orientation for us RC pilots. Now, the paint job on my example is actually pretty good. The paint is applied evenly and there's no bleeding under the borders, which were taped. Also, the decals, which are factory applied, were put on straight and there's no bubbles underneath or lifted edges. So overall, the fit and finish on my model is quite good. Most of the electronics that you will need for the CJ-6 are included and pre-installed. This includes electric retracts for the tricycle landing gear. There are also servos for each of the flight controls. There are 2 aileron servos and then 1 servo each for the rudder and elevator. There's also a servo that drives the split flap in the middle of the wing. Finally, there's a servo that provides nose wheel steering. The CJ-6 also includes a brushless outrunner motor and a 40 amp speed control. There are 2 items that you will have to provide for the CJ-6. The first of those is a 4-cell 2200 milliamp hour LiPo battery. The primary battery that I've been using is a Connexus brand LiPo with a 40C discharge rate. You will also have to provide a radio system with at least 6 channels. And I've been using my Futaba 14SG transmitter, and it is mated to a Futaba R7008 SB receiver. This is actually version 2 of the CJ-6 from FMS. Aside from a few cosmetic changes, the primary difference is that this airplane now includes the Reflex V2 gyro. And this gyro, once you have it configured, provides you with 3 stabilization options that you can choose with a switch on your transmitter. The first mode is stabilize mode, and in this mode, the CJ-6 has pitch and bank limits that will keep you from climbing or rolling too aggressively. And the CJ-6 will also auto level if you release the right stick when you're in stabilize mode. So basically, stabilize mode is a safety net for pilots who may just be transitioning from their trainer or for whatever reason are not yet comfortable flying a high-performance warbird like the CJ-6. Now, another stabilization mode is optimize mode. Optimize mode does not have pitch or bank limits, nor does it auto level the airplane. So the CJ-6 is completely aerobatic in optimize mode. What optimize mode does do is compensate for uncommanded movements of the airplane. So basically, optimize mode makes the CJ-6 fly more smoothly in rough air. The third gyro option you have is to turn the gyro off completely and fly the CJ-6 totally manually. As I mentioned before, the CJ-6 is mostly factory built, so not much assembly is required to get this model airworthy. And of those steps that are necessary, most of it went very smoothly for me. There were, however, a few things that I thought were worth pointing out. The first involves the elevator. In stock form, the geometry of the linkage causes the clevis to meet the elevator horn at sort of an odd angle, and I was concerned that this could cause premature wear and failure of these components. And of course, a failure here would be a death sentence for the airplane. So I corrected this by adding a slight S-bend to the pushrod that got everything aligned as it should be. Another sticky area that I ran into involved mounting the battery. The fuselage has a plywood tray with integrated straps that is intended to be the battery mounting location. The problem I had is that the battery had to be mounted significantly forward of that in order to balance the airplane. And in this sort of situation, you have two basic resolution options. The first would be to add weight to the nose to balance the airplane, and the second would be to fabricate some sort of way to mount the battery further forward in a secure way. Well, I took the easy way out in this case, and I put 3/4 of an ounce of lead just behind the face of the cowling. This allowed me to balance the airplane and utilize the stock battery location. Now let's talk about flying the CJ-6. As you would expect, the tricycle landing gear provides good ground handling. It is worth noting that there is not a ton of propeller clearance here. Now, I typically fly from a fairly rough grass field, but even in that situation, the CJ-6 handled it just fine. There may be a few grass stains on the propeller tips, but I had no trouble taxiing around and taking off with this model. I think that the stock power system provides a good blend of climb performance and speed with the CJ-6. In fact, I was particularly impressed with the speed that this model is capable of at full throttle. But of course, it also does well when you throttle back and slow things down a little bit. With the gyro set to stabilize mode, the CJ-6 is actually quite docile. You will find that it takes large control inputs just to get this model around the pattern. And that's a good thing for pilots who are still trying to build their confidence with this kind of airplane. Now, all of that changes when you switch the gyro to either optimize mode or you turn it off. In that case, the CJ-6 then becomes very aerobatic. It is capable of loops and rolls, inverted flight, spins, and all of the maneuvers that you would expect from a sport plane or warbird. My only gripe with the flight performance of the CJ-6 is that it has less rudder authority than I prefer. So when you're talking about yaw-heavy maneuvers such as knife-edge flight, wingovers, and stall turns, the CJ-6 is capable of those things, but you really have to work at it because you do not have excess yaw authority at your disposal. Do not forget that the CJ-6 has a split flap in the middle of the wing, and this flap is only about 1/4 of the total wingspan, but it actually does a really good job of slowing the airplane down for landing. I have the flap configured to a 3-position switch on my transmitter so I can have it retracted, halfway deployed, or fully deployed. I also programmed in 15% down elevator movement with the flap, and this negates any changes in pitch trim when the flaps are deployed. When using a 4-cell 2200 mAh battery, my flight times with the CJ-6 are typically around 6 minutes. Of course, that includes a mixture of full power aerobatics and partial throttle cruising around. I've also found that there's plenty of room inside the CJ-6 to fit a 4-cell 3300 mAh battery. And with this larger battery, I found that I get a couple extra minutes of flight time and no significant decrease in performance. This concludes my overview of the CJ-6 version 2 from FMS. I will wrap things up with some footage of this model in flight. I also want to point out that you will find additional details in the written article that can be found in Model Aviation magazine, so be sure to check that out as well. Thanks for watching.